About building something out of nothing, really. So what do I mean by that? This is the too big to properly fit on a slide version of the title. So, how to build a passionate community from scratch using social media, events, and great content. But first of all, who am I? For those of you that don't know me, as I said, my name's Natalie Griffith. I have my own indie PR agency called Pressbase. I've been in the games industry nearly 25 years now. I started off as a graphic designer, working on contract Nintendo magazines and doing games packaging, that kind of thing. And I spent a couple of years with Codemasters, also designing their games packaging and marketing flyers. Then I spent 5 years as games journalist. I was the editor of the official Nintendo magazine for Australia and New Zealand. And then I made the move into the dark side of PR, and I joined Blitz Games Studios in Leamington in 2000, and I established their PR and marketing team there, and I stayed there for 12 years. And I now have, as I say, my own PR agency designed specifically to work with indie developers. It seemed to me that it was the indie developers that were the sort of source of a lot of the most creative, interesting, and exciting stuff that was going on, but they were also the guys that often needed the most help with their PR. So I do a mix of actually doing PR campaigns for indie developers, and I do lots of training and mentoring for them as well, so that they can learn to do their PR themselves. For the last year or so, I've been working with an indie startup called Payload Studios on a game called Terratech, and that's kind of fed into this presentation in a big way. They came to me just over a year ago. They had an idea for a really unusual, new, original game. They knew that they had a little bit of funding, but they knew that their next step was going to be to go to Kickstarter 6 or 7 months later. But they also knew that to do Kickstarter, they needed to have something good to show. So they wanted to work on a prototype. And the big thing that impressed me right from the beginning was that they understood the importance of community building and the importance of getting a fan base on your side right from the beginning. To the extent that they made the commitment that they hired me to do the PR and marketing strategy, and they hired a community manager before they even hired a second programmer to work on the game. And I think that focus has been really borne out with the success we've had so far this year. So we got them to Kickstarter. We got selected for 4 or 5 different game shows and games events to demo the game. We got through our Kickstarter in the summer, and we're now in closed beta at the moment, and we're going into open beta very shortly. So a lot of the lessons have kind of implemented through that and learned through that process hopefully can feed into what I'm telling you today. So luckily Payload, their founder Russ had a really good, clear idea up front that this community building thing was important and that PR was really, really important. Sadly though, a lot of people think PR is pretty pointless, and who needs a community? I think a lot of the two extremes of the people that think this is pointless are kind of either blindly optimistic or blindly pessimistic in my experience. So on the sort of blindly optimistic side, I think Ed covered this very, very succinctly a few minutes ago, actually. This idea that kind of, oh, well, I'll get onto Steam and it will all be fine. That'll be great. I won't need to do anything else. We'll just get on the front page of Steam and it'll be great. Or let's do a Kickstarter. Great, not a bad idea in itself, but a lot of people think that having a Kickstarter campaign is, in and of itself, free marketing. And also, a lot of people are quite sensibly recognising that YouTube is a key influencer these days in reaching your target audience and building a kind of fan base. But a lot of people seem to think that that's something that happens quickly and easily as well. And it's like, well, that's fine. I'll just send an email to PewDiePie and we'll all be sorted. It'll be great. And then on the kind of slightly more cynical, blindly pessimistic side of this, you have some that kind of go, well, I don't know whether I should bother really, because it's all about who you know anyway, isn't it? It doesn't really matter about the game. And then they'll pick on individual indie developers who have had some success, and they'll just dismiss that success as kind of, oh, well, he just got lucky, because they didn't see all of the 6 years of hard work that went into the point that he thinks was just overnight luck. So, is it pointless? Yeah, not so much. But that doesn't mean that it's not also bloody hard work. So why do we bother? Well, to address some of those kind of cynical, blindly optimistic and pessimistic points. The Steam one I won't dwell on because, as I say, Ed covered that really succinctly a few minutes ago, but this idea that discoverability on Steam is not now what it was. It's much harder to get yourself seen on there. You can't just rely on appearing and then sitting in the newly released lists for a few weeks or a few days anymore. So you have to make sure that you have a fan base willing to go and find you. You can't just expect to be discovered. On the Kickstarter side, this idea that Kickstarter in itself is a marketing campaign, total nonsense. To have a successful Kickstarter, if you're not David Braben or Tim Schafer, takes a phenomenal amount of work, and it needs its own marketing campaign, equal to, or if not more than, in some cases, the launch of an indie title. It's a big deal. It's a lot of effort in the prep and a lot of effort in the management of the campaign itself, so never think that that's an easy route to free money. And on the YouTube side, yes, YouTube is really, really important, but you won't, unless you're incredibly lucky, you won't just fall across Total Biscuit's email address and suddenly discover that he loves your game and then he does a 25-part Let's Play on it. It's unlikely that that's going to happen. So again, you have to start small. You have to build early advocates, and some of the smaller YouTubers with a lower subscription number, first of all. Don't get hung up on those numbers. Don't kind of think, well, I'm only going to show my game to people with 50,000 subs and above. That's pointless. You have to create a groundswell, because the smaller YouTubers then start to influence the medium-sized ones, who start to influence the bigger ones. In terms of the who you know point, I'm going to sort of half agree with that one, but not in the way that Mr. Cynical in that comment would mean it. I'm going to agree with it in terms of the fact that PR has always been about relationship building. It is about who you know, but that doesn't mean that you can get away with not having a really strong game, or that you can just rely on that relationship to get coverage. You have to work at that. You have to build relationships with people. You have to get to know what they like and what they're interested in. That's how the world works. In terms of luck, again, yes, I think people do get lucky sometimes, but I'm of the belief that to a degree you make your own luck, and also that those kind of serendipitous moments that come your way, they're completely wasted if you're not able to spot them. And even if you spot them, they're also completely wasted if you're not able to do anything about them. So I think putting yourself in the way of serendipity is really, really important. Getting yourself out there, again, building a community, allowing the environment where those kind of lucky moments can happen, then spotting them and acting on them to really make the most of them. So hopefully I've convinced you that it is worth bothering with. So how do you go about seeing the wood for the trees, just to extend Ed's analogy about being lost in the woods? Well, as with anything, it's all about the planning. And first off, when you're planning what you're going to do on the kind of PR side and community side, first of all, before you do anything else, you've got to decide what it is that you want to achieve. What are you shooting for? Part of the thing you need to know to define that is how long you've got to achieve it as well. Now, often that's going to be driven by how much money you've got if you're an indie developer. How long can you keep sustaining the bills that you need to pay? And that's going to help drive it. But you're all going to have different things that impact on your ability to reach a certain point. So make sure you're coming up with a plan that's actually achievable within the resources and the time that you've got. Find out think about what's possible for you to do. And in that respect, I'm talking about your skills and what you're capable of doing and what your experience is. If you're a student coming into the indie side for the first time, or doing your first game, there's going to be a lot of skills that perhaps you've not had the opportunity to gain at university or in other walks of life. But likewise, if you're coming from a big studio and then going indie, there's still going to be areas that you perhaps weren't exposed to when you were in a bigger organisation. There's always going to be things you need to learn. And as Ella and Helena have said earlier on in the day, that, it's always worth seeking out people that know about these things. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You then need to think about your positioning, which sounds like one of those kind of meh marketing expressions, but it is the most succinct way of describing what I'm talking about here. So you need to work out where you fit in the marketplace. So that's not just the game you're working on, that's you as a studio as well. If you want to be successful beyond this one game and this first idea you've got, you have to be thinking about your studio brand as well. So think about what your competition is. Where do you stand out? What's different about what you're doing? What do you want to be known for, or remembered for, or respected for? Make sure once you've got all that clear in your own minds, you can really succinctly and clearly explain that to other people. Then once you've got that, you need to establish your basic presence. You'll notice the theme with these headings. I'm a big fan of alliteration, so I've forced all of these to start with a P. So your initial presence online, obviously you've got to have a website, as Alana again said earlier on. It's the first port of call for most people finding out about you. So make sure you take that stuff that you've learned while you've been working on your positioning and get that onto a website. It doesn't need to be hugely sophisticated. It only needs to be a fairly basic thing at first. But one thing I would say with websites is, yes, don't over-design them or over-engineer them up front, but do try and have half a mind to where you think you want them to be later. Make sure they're extensible in some way. So if you think later on down the line you want to be able to integrate forums so that your community can talk about what you're doing, or maybe you want to be able to receive payments and actually sell merchandise or sell copies of your game, think about all that stuff and don't saddle yourself with a design or a WordPress setup that's actually going to make some of that kind of stuff difficult later. Try and future-proof yourself if you can. And also, if you do nothing else, go to dopresskit.com, which is a brilliant press kit creation tool created by Dutch indie developers Vlambeer. And it's the perfect template for all of the things that you need to get across in a press kit. Most of the media now are really used to receiving resources in that way, and they're just super useful for them to use. But as well as that, if you've struggled with the step before, with the positioning of working out exactly what it is that you want to say and how you want to say it, the template and the headers in that dopresskit.com are super useful because they will give you those prompts to ask the questions that perhaps you might not have thought of. So the other thing you need to sort out when you're working out your initial presence is obviously your social media. Establish a Twitter account. It's going to be absolutely vital for you from a networking standpoint and relationship building with the press, particularly if you can't get out to lots and lots of events. Think about Facebook as well, but don't assume you have to have a Facebook presence. Don't spread yourself too thin if actually the kind of people that are likely to be rallying around a community for your game aren't the kind of people that get their games information from a Facebook group. Think about it. Don't create it just because it's there. Think about what's going to be useful for you. YouTube as well. We've touched on kind of big name YouTubers briefly. But video content is absolutely crucial these days, even if it's just something as simple as a fun little vine of an amusing new bit of AI you've got working in the game or whatever it is. All of this kind of visual content is super useful and super interesting to people. So set up a channel so that it doesn't matter if you've not got much on there, first of all, but you get these channels up and established. You link between them as well, which is all really important, and then you've got a really, really good base there to work from later. So once you've got these initial channels and this initial network set up, you need to get started. And the most important thing in actually using all of these media channels is sharing your passion. So the passion about what you're working on, what you care about. Be really authentic, be really transparent, and be really genuine. But make sure as well that you're not just passionate about your own stuff. Make sure you're passionate about other people's stuff as well. One bit of advice I often give indies, excuse me, about Twitter work in particular, is to have this kind of split, third split of the type of content. So only a third of what you push out on Twitter should be you like broadcasting, talking about what you're doing or about your game. A third of it should be conversation. So that might be answering questions that have come in to you about your game, admittedly, but it could be starting conversations with other people. It could be answering other people's questions, helping them, contributing to conversations on various trends and topics that are happening. And then the final third should be sharing other people's stuff. So amplifying other people's work, congratulating them when they've won awards or had a game released or whatever. Helping other people celebrate and amplify their journey will get really loyal followers on board for you, and that will pay back dividends later on, because they'll be invested in your journey and they'll want to see you successful as well. Most importantly though, as people do start to follow you and you start to build those numbers up and you start to build your community, it's vital that you engage with them. So again, don't try to do too much too soon. Don't create 1 million different channels and chuck loads of stuff out on them and then suddenly realize that nobody in your team's got time to monitor them or respond to any of the questions, because that's where your burgeoning community will die straight away. But you can't just rely on chat. As I say, it's not just about having conversations with people and about broadcasting stuff. It's about producing content as well. You need to make sure that you're to keep like new community members interested and to interest people who've not heard of you before. You need to show that your feeds and your channels are putting out a really interesting, varied array of different types of content. So that can be visual content, it can be written content, but make sure it's interesting, it's informative, it's varied, and it's original as well. And also try and aim for maximum reuse, maximum repurposing. You're going to be really, really short of time, and you're going to be short of hands on deck to do this kind of stuff. So don't make a rod for your own back by committing to 15 new screenshots every 2 days or whatever it is. Make sure that whatever you're creating, I always challenge people to kind of, anything they create, try and reuse it in at least 3 ways. So if you've created a screenshot to put in a pitch document for an investor or for a publisher, for instance, well, how about you push that out on Saturday morning for Screenshot Saturday, hashtag on Twitter. push it out on Indie Dev Hour on Wednesday afternoon on Twitter? Can you use it for your Facebook header image if it's a really nice new one? Can you use it to illustrate that blog that you were going to write next week? Don't ever create something and then only use it once. So what you're essentially creating here is a content marketing plan, which again sounds a bit like, that's a bit of a kind of irritating marketing speak type expression, but that's what you're doing and that's what people care about. The other really important thing when you're working out what stuff you're creating for these purposes is to make sure that your development plan drives the content that you create. So again, don't make a rod for your own back by deciding randomly to do a whole load of screenshots. Look at your plan for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, month, whatever, and then kind of think, well, okay, at that point, we're going to be working on the new terrain or the new characters in the game or whatever it is. Okay, well, in that case, if we're doing that then we can plan a blog post about that for the week after, and we can take some screenshots as we're doing it, and then we can do some video. So let your development plan drive what your marketing plan is. Then you're never going to be in a sort of cart before the horse situation. And that way, you're going to be able to show really, really tangible progress as you go along. You are genuinely going to be bringing people along the journey with you in your development journey. Also, try and look at lots of ways of really showing that progress in action as well. And one thing we've done lots with TerraTech is the guys have been on Twitch every weekday at 5 o'clock for about 4 months now. And although that's quite a commitment, they've got into a brilliant routine with it now. And they've got a really good mix of stuff and a really good variety. We've made sure that we've had interesting and varied stuff going on. It's caught the attention of the people at Twitch. We had conversations with them quite early on about the possibility of trying to get featured slots with them nearer towards our Kickstarter. They gave us some advice on the kind of things that they wanted to see, and then we worked really hard for the following 6 or 8 weeks to make sure that that's what our channel was providing. And although our viewer numbers and our subscriber numbers weren't huge, because we'd made that effort of providing varied content for their platform, we did get that featured slot from Twitch on the opening weekend of our Kickstarter. And because that had been so successful for us at that point, we tried it on and went back again for the closing weekend of our Kickstarter, and we managed to get another one. So it's always worth talking to the channel providers and the other people that can help you and get some guidance. But something like Twitch is a brilliant way to connect immediately with your audience. So the other really important thing is to let people get their hands on your stuff early. And this is kind of an interesting thing that I think historically a lot of developers have been like, oh, no, I can't show you it till it's finished. But I think increasingly with the rise of things like early access and greenlight, with the rise of shows in the UK like Rezzed, where you see a lot of indie games out really early, the press in particular are used to seeing things quite early, but I think increasingly the public are now too, and they kind of understand a little bit more of the process. And again, for TerraTech, it was absolutely vital for us to get our game out to people really early on, and that's where we got our initial groundswell of community. And everybody that came and played the game at the show and loved it, we were tweeting pictures of them. We created a little mining crew, like almost fan club, if you like. And so the people that were kind of really enthusiastic at shows, they would come back and see us at other shows. They would tell their friends to come. And although that started small, that's something that can snowball over time, and it's vital to keep doing that kind of thing. So anybody that's enthusiastic about their game, about your game, empower them to continue to be enthusiastic. Don't get in their way. Most of them are really polite, and they will come and they will say, do you mind if I stream your game? Do you mind if I YouTube your game? And even if they've only got 15 followers, it doesn't matter. It's like, absolutely, always let them do that. Let them push out content that they've created using your game. Let them monetize it. Bring them into the process, and you'll learn loads from it, but you will also build incredibly strong advocates that will go with you later on down the line. I talked about the press a second ago. So yeah, as I say, most press are really experienced, and they know that when they see something early, they can see past the early art or the kind of buggy bits and pieces, and it's not going to scupper your chances of getting a good review in 8 months' time if you show a journalist early. And actually, most journalists are looking for that unusual thing, for that new spark of something that might be the next big thing and that they've got the scoop on. So even if you think it's too early for a journalist to want to cover it, never miss an opportunity to show a journalist your game early. And if you say to, again, the reputable journalists, if you say to them, this is off the record, it's early, we just wanted you to see it, they will respect that, and you will start to build those relationships, and they'll be interested in the game as it goes through. And the same's true for like streamers and YouTubers. Again, like I said at the beginning, it can be difficult to contact some of the big guys. It's notoriously difficult to contact even some of the small guys on YouTube. But again, if you get your community rallying behind you and talking about you a lot in social media, talking about you on Steam forums, on the IndieDB pages, all of these kind of things are the places where a lot of those YouTubers hang out. So even if sometimes you can't reach them directly yourself, by galvanizing your community and empowering them to start talking about it in all of these kind of places, you will eventually come to the notice of the right people. Results do genuinely beget results. And the really important thing with all this is to remember that this all takes tons of practice. You're not going to be a promotional pro right from the beginning. You're going to make mistakes, but that's okay. We all do. But you need to practice that planning, that working out how to position yourself, practice that elevator pitch so that you can quickly explain your game in 15 seconds on a busy show floor. You need to practice the twitching and getting used to being in front of camera. You need to practice taking good screenshots. There's an art in that in itself. And honing your blogging, writing style, all of those kind of things need practicing. But that's why it's really, really important to start as early as possible. Because mistakes early on are way, way less costly than mistakes near the end of the process. And then finally, because we needed a final thing beginning with a P, proof of the pudding will be in the results that you get if you follow this all the way through. And again, we saw that with TerraTech. We had 6-7 months of really hard work and slow slog building up the community. But we got enough head of steam and we got enough momentum that we managed to hit our Kickstarter target in the summer. And it's really satisfying when you see all of those threads start to come together. And it's incredibly compelling when you see your fans rallying around trying to help get you over the line on a Kickstarter. That's when you know you've hit people. But even if you're not going for a Kickstarter, or even if you're not trying to get people to vote you up on a Greenlight campaign or whatever, even just coming towards a launch on an indie game, that kind of exposure issue we talked about on Steam in particular, you have to have a whole load of people who can come and support you and come and buy the game straight out of the gate. And that's not something you can fast track. So yes, I've got questions on there. I don't know if we've got time for questions. We haven't. Never mind. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yes, I mean, my Twitter's on there. If anybody does have any questions, hit me up. On that way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.